Hello and welcome, Exiles, to a step-by-step guide of the first two acts. Granted, we're only going to have three total, so this will give you a good idea about 60% of your playthrough between the normal and the cruel difficulties of the Act 1 and Act 2, as I'd imagine they should look fairly similar to the playthroughs that people have posted online, like Nugian and Havoc, who did a playthrough where they got all the way almost to the end of Act 2, which was in the June playtest. And then my man Bajira, who I'm a big fan of, who posted basically 3 hours of unedited gameplay of him doing the first act in pretty good detail, most recently in the November playtest. Now, I'm going to warn you right now, this is going to contain spoilers about some boss names, but I'm not going to show any footage of bosses, and it's just going to have some zone names and kind of the process of which you do things. That's what you can expect. That's your warning. Now let's get into it. I have mapped out from these videos basically the various zone names as well as the bosses you find in zones. Now, GGG has previously stated that they are going to have the ability to randomize the map, so to speak, in terms of like, I think it's going to have something to do with the layout being like the art of each map changing league by league, but ultimately I think the certain zones that are connected to certain stones is going to remain the same. Like, you're not going to go from fighting the carrion crone to being randomly connected to the hunting grounds. That wouldn't make any sense. They're not going to randomize like that. Most likely it's going to mean maybe Act 1 town starts here and then the old forest is connected over here, that sort of thing. The general principle of progression should remain the same. Now let's go ahead and get into the progression. You're going to start out on the riverbank. That's where you're going to wash up when you first create your character. And you're going to fight your first boss, the Bloated Miller. He's a simple melee boss. You take him out, and all of a sudden, you have passed your way into your first town. This is your hub where you're going to find vendors. And I will say, I have a text document that goes through all the various steps that I've written down, and this is kind of what I'm going to be basing this off of, and there will be a link to this text document or a paste bin for it below. But there's things like, for example, Renly, one of the vendors in town, he's going to be the guy you go to for armors and weapons. And Una is the vendor in town that you're going to go for caster and jewelry. This is important for just early gear upgrades. There's a lot of good gear on these vendors, and there's also a gambler one. But honestly, from what I've seen and the gold cost, I think you're better off buying and just rechecking these vendors somewhat regularly, because the gold cost of a random gambled item versus an item you buy from the shop is like 3-to-1 expense. So that's what I would personally say. But anyways, this is your hub where you're going to go back and forth from whenever you go to a zone or you need to port back to go get flash charges, or maybe you need to sell some stuff to clear your inventory. This is your hub of operation. After which, your first zone you're going to go into is the Clearfell zone, and you will find the Carrion Crow. Very easy boss, but you want to kill it. It will give you a 10 cold res buff, and this is permanent. And this is a thing that's going to move forward throughout the campaign. Pretty much every boss you fight usually has either a quest reward or some specific drop or a absolutely permanent and very necessary buff that you're going to want to get. It's one of those three things generally. Carrion Crone is a permanent buff, and then on the side here, the Devourer, which is hidden away or tucked away in the mud burrow, this little underground zone here. Speaking of which, if you see this symbol right here, that means it's an underground zone. You'll see that symbol show up a few other places in these other areas. I believe that's just the symbol they're using for underground zone. But anyways, Devourer, this is where you get your first support gem. You're absolutely going to want to do this before you go on to the Old Forest. You might find the Old Forest zone first. Personally, I would suggest you're better off doing the burrow first, because it's going to give you a damage support, which is going to be a big improvement for doing the future fights after this. Devourer, from what I can tell, is a weaker boss than the following bosses, and they will keep scaling up, even though Devourer's got a little bit of a, I don't know, a little bit difficult mechanics, but I'd say ultimately he doesn't have that much HP, and for most builds, it should be straightforward enough. You'll die maybe a couple times to some mechanics, but you want to do this for that instant upgrade of a support gem. After which, you're going to go on to the Old Forest, and in here, there's a few, basically, I guess, key points you'll find. Number one, I want to note, as far as I can tell from how the map is showing these things, the horns, I think, means this is a boss you've beaten, because basically, there are some bosses where I just don't know what it stands for, but these are generally for the boss symbols, and I think this one is maybe the ones that they've beaten. That's my theory, that there's a couple of bosses on this guy's map. This is Bajira's map that we're taking this from, where he didn't defeat the boss, and so I think maybe there's another boss that I didn't know about, which when I watched through the playthrough and was taking notes. But anyways, Brambleghast, one of the first bosses you'll fight in here. He is necessary to help you untangle the Grim Tangle Zone, as well as you also need to free the Hooded One. And to do that, you're going to go to a side zone called the Red Veil, and you're going to kill the Rust King, gathering some rune spikes, and come on back here to hammer those spikes into the tree, which somehow frees the Hooded One, and then he's going to be a persistent main campaign character that starts to show up in your Act 1 town, and you can use him to identify items, as well as respec your tree. I think maybe he's the vendor you talk to for that. I'm not 100% sure. But anyways, after you have done both the Brambleghast kill and the Rust King kill and freed the Hooded One, you're going to be able to proceed on through the Grim Tangle. This is an underground zone which transports you to the Graveyard. Graveyard's basically a pretty big open area with 2 underground zones linked to it. At the beginning, you'll talk to a dude named Lachlan, and essentially you need to go on, I'm going to call it a pseudo fetch quest for some keys to get into his family's graveyard, something like that. Anyways, you're going to go over and you're going to fight Draven, and you're going to fight Asenia. These are 2 of the harder bosses in Act 1, I believe. From all the playthroughs I've seen, people seem to struggle with these bosses the most. They're pretty tricky. The one thing I'd recommend is make sure when you die, click Resurrected Checkpoint. If you don't click Resurrected Checkpoint, you will have to re-traverse through the zones to get to then fight the boss, which ultimately isn't the end of the world. If you had a hard time with the boss, and then if you get to go you go back through the zone, you're going to maybe level up or pick up some more gear while doing it, which would make the fight subsequently easier. Ultimately, whenever you run into a hard fight, if you're just hitting a wall and your character can't do it, just reset a little bit. Go farm some easier monsters, try to get a little bit better gear, and then come back to it. It will be much easier going forward. Okay, so you fetch quest, you get the 2 items that form the key, and then Lachlan says, I'm going to turn into a big baddie, and then you fight Lachlan, and that allows you to get access to the hunting grounds. This zone is very important because it has 2 of your bigger upgrades attached to it, not to mention whatever this boss is that I don't know what it is because Bajira didn't fight in his game through. But anyways, the Crowbell, this is a side boss. You will fight for 2 weapon passives. You definitely don't want to skip that. And then there's a side zone called the Canopy, and this is probably one of the other biggest upgrades aside from the support gem that you'll get early on, which is your first persistent buff gem. You get 30 spirit from killing the King of Mist, and your first buff gem, which is something like Herald of Ash or Magma Barrier. There's a lot of like passive benefits you can get. Find one that works for your class and get your first reservation skill, which will give you a nice little stat boost. After killing the King of the Mist, you are going to proceed to the farmlands. There is a boss here that I don't know what it is, but it is on the mini-map. You will get the loot box, which is a quest item you need to return to Una in town, which is you can just port back there and then go back. That gives you, I believe, 2 weapon passives, and then you will move on through Ogham's village all the way to the Executioner. This is your gateway into getting to the courtyard, which will allow you to then get to the Iron Manor, which is the final zone where you will fight the Iron Count. I would recommend keep your eyes out for a statue called Candlemass, or it looks like a candle-like monster, because killing this monster is plus 20 life, okay? And you definitely don't want to miss out on that. So that is Act 1 in synopsis. This is from the most recent playtest in November. This is most likely very similar what the map will look like coming December 6th. They will have these boss icons, and I believe you can potentially hover over them, and they might give you an idea. They might say, oh, this is going to give you a 10 stat bonus if you beat it, if you hover over the boss. I don't know if that's a key feature, but I think people were telling me that's a feature. And now let's look at the Act 2 map. Something a little bit different I want to notice here is this is from the June playtest, which was 6 months ago, or 6 months ago, 7 months ago, or whatever it was, instead of 1 month ago, which means it's a little bit more outdated. For example, you don't notice any skulls for boss fights, but I think relatively that is probably something they added in, which would give you more of an idea of what sort of passive benefits you can get throughout, as well as it will tell you there's maybe a chance they change some of the zone layouts, but I think it's going to be pretty close to what we have here. Now, to start off with, you start out in this desert camp area, and you go and you kill a boss called Wrathbaker. Now, he got 30 spirit from this dude right after, which seems pretty close to when they got 30 spirit, pretty close to when you got 30 spirit from Canopy, so I don't know if that's going to be the same. The rewards from these bosses might be moved around, but I'd imagine they're keeping the same bosses and they wouldn't be removing bosses out. But anyways, you kill Wrathbreaker, and that allows you to unlock your access to the caravan. And the interesting system about the Act 2, I guess, how you transition between zones, is it's a moving town. Essentially, there is a map device in the town where you say, hey, I want to go to this portion of the map. So say we start out here, we then have to go to the map thing. We have to say travel over next to the quarry, and then you will find a doorway that allows you to exit into the quarry. And then once you get through this section of the campaign, you'll go back to that map device area and you'll say, let's move the caravan over to here per se. So that's the idea. Essentially, every single little segment of the Act 2 campaign, you have to tell your caravan, hey, let's go over there. And then you jump out and you explore that zone. So that's the sort of idea with these blue squares. As for the progression, the way Havoc and Noogie did it is they went straight through to the quarry area, went up, killed this boss, got back to town, and then they went over and did, I believe it was the Queen Kabbalah next. No, that's not correct. I actually believe they went and did Trader's Passage next. Trader's Passage is where you're going to run into the first ability to do a ascendancy trial with the Balbala boss fight. He's kind of hidden in the cave area there. Definitely, I'd say you want to keep an eye out for this because this is your first really big upgrade to your character. Just make sure your character's like, you know, if you're having a hard time in the campaign, maybe overlevel a little bit more before you go and do this. But 100% you're going to want that ascendancy point because it's going to be a nice power boost to your character throughout the rest of the campaign. Always you want to get your ascendancy power, your ascendancy upgrades. It's the biggest thing you can do in upgrading your characters. But anyways, Balbala's in the Trader's Passage. And then after that, you have the Ancient Gates area where you fight the Perennial King. And he retreats like a little chicken because you absolutely kick his butt. After doing that, you go back to town. And Noogie and Havoc went and they did the Lost City of Keth, zone, where there's essentially 3 different bosses. Queen of Kabbalah, then you go to Lower Temple District and you fight the 9th Treasure of Keth, and then you go to the Keth Sanctum and you fight the Forsaken Sun. After this, you get some quest stuff. I'm not really trying to go into too much detail about the quest stuff, not just because I don't necessarily understand what the hell's going on, but also because maybe they change some stuff around. And, you know, I'm not really a quest lore guy. I'm sure there's going to be people that are going to make lore videos about this. After December 6th, they start getting into the game, they start reading all the lore. There's going to be people who will make much better videos that actually understand what the hell's going on way better than I do. But anyways, after Forsaken Sun, then they went and did Valley of Titans and fought this Colossus boss. I believe there was an extra quest in here that they had not completed at the time. Something about they gathered up these relics, and there's probably some passive benefit they had missed out on doing it, but their playthrough ended before they even got to the end, which I believe they were approaching the Act 2 end boss, and they were just trying to rush there as fast as they could. After killing the Colossus, they went down and they did Mastodon Badlands into the Bone Pits, killed Ekbab and Blackrib, and that was allowing them to, I guess, the quest reward from doing that is they could fashion a nice special horn that would allow them to defeat the sandstorm in the way to chase after the Perennial King, something like that. And anyways, then they chase after the Perennial King, and before they could go after the Dreadnought, they had to go through the Burial Spires, Mourner's Path, Sacred Spire, these 3 zones all attached together into fighting Torgal the Defiler. And that was the last boss fight before they ran out of playtime in the June playtest. That is a pretty good look at Act 2. I'm pretty sure this is literally like, if this isn't close to the last zone in Act 2, it's the next to last zone in Act 2. As 1, you're running out of map space, and 2, based on the story of what's happening here, if you're chasing down the Perennial King and he's in all the artwork, he definitely seems like he's the Act 2 end boss as far as I can tell. That seems to be like they're closing in on the Act 2 boss. So hopefully my work spending a couple days looking through all these playtests meticulously and recording some notes is somewhat useful to those of you who like to have a general idea of progression. I just want to mostly do this for myself, so that way I know going into this is, okay, this is some of the progression I want to do. These are some of the boss fights I can expect. But yeah, I'm going to link to these playtests below where you can go and look this footage, which is how we got together this information, as well as a pastebin link or whatever for this text file of the Act 1 and 2 progression that I wrote down while watching through these playtests meticulously. Anyways, hopefully you guys enjoy this video on the look at Acts 1 and 2 of Path of Exile 2. Maybe this gives you something to help you prepare for December 6th and log in and then get, logged out and put back in the queue. Oh, I hope the servers survive. I hope they survive. But man, I'm a little bit nervous because this game does seem to be getting a lot more attention than base PU1 ever got in a league launch. We'll see how it goes. As always, thanks for watching, Exiles. Take care and peace out. Have a good one.